Hello and welcome to another episode of Biz Bites, where what we try and do is get the story behind the story of the business. And I'm really fascinated with my guest today. Rik, thank you so much for joining us. What I like to do from the beginning is basically say, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your business just quickly as an introduction.
Okay, cool. Essentially, well, firstly, thank you for inviting me onto the program. So thank you, Anthony. My business in a nutshell is essentially what we do is typically we teach life coaches to be able to do their craft, to be able to coach, to be able to put themselves out there, to be able to help people. And we also teach neuro-linguistic programming right through to master training, right through to speaker training and trainer training. And that's primarily what we do. As well as that, of course, I coach and I write and I do all sorts of things and spend time with yourself. And so there's a whole host of other things that we typically do in businesses. But the most important thing that, we're often telling our coaches is focus on your main game.
Yes, it's look, and I definitely want to get into that whole idea of coaching coaches because I love that, and particularly the kinds of areas that you're in. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you what led you down this path of coaching in the first place, and then getting to the point where you're coaching coaches.
Firstly, the reason that I got into this space was, when I was 7 years old, my best friend was a library card. I spent a lot of time in the library looking at kids' books, got bored with those, went around the corner and just happened to find myself in the psychology section, the mindset section, and started reading a lot of those books and became very fascinated about the fact that you could change. Because around that particular time, even at 7 years old, I thought you were constricted by your parents. Whatever your parents were, you were going to be. And you were stuck in that particular paradigm. But I became quite enthralled and fascinated in things like psychology, hypnosis, some of the touch therapies, and many different people's lives that had gone through incredible transformation. So that ultimately did lead me to want to do the deep dive and really study the brain and how do we think, how do we work, how do we become who we become. And that's been, I guess it's been my lifelong passion. So it was a no-brainer to go into that area. Mind you, before I went into that area, I was in advertising, I was then in marketing, I was then in sales. And when I was in marketing, a journalist came into my office one day, threw an envelope on my desk and said, "That is you." And I said, "Great, fantastic. I'm an envelope." And she said, no. She said, "I've just done a story about this new thing called life coaching, and you are a natural at this." And I said, "Okay, tell me, what is life coaching?" And in all honesty, I actually resisted opening up that envelope because I knew the day I did was the day that I was going to change career. And that's exactly what happened. It was back in the days of videos. I remember putting the video into my VCR machine and watching this video on this industry that was about to form called life coaching. And so I jumped in, boots and all, and I found home. I found the place that made so much sense to me.
And I love those kinds of stories. And it's funny, there's a mentor of mine who said many years ago when I first heard him present, I still remember him saying, "Your career is nothing more than a collection of selected pivotal moments." And yes. I love how you've kind of isolated a number of those at that point. And it's fascinating that you've had that, you go back to being a little kid. And where that began. And I think that's true of a lot of people, though they don't actually realize it. That a lot of, I know a lot of clients that I've worked with, when you go back to that reason why they're doing it, it often relates back to something that happened around the teenage years, or sometimes in your case, a little bit earlier. And it leads you down a path. And so, opening that envelope would have been, did you realize at the time when you opened that you opened the envelope that really was going to be transformational for you.
Yeah, I think when we consider our five senses, I've come to understand that our five senses make us who we are. You know, it's the recording data. It's just like a cassette machine or a CD writer or whatever it might be. But it's actually that sixth sense, which is the one that we deny most often. You know, and you might center that around your heart or your intuition or something along that line. I just knew. I knew the moment I was going to open that envelope was the moment that I was going to make a whole new level of decision. But I also had some fear around that. And the reason that I resisted opening that envelope is my logical side could not compute. You know, how do you make money as a life coach? You know, because it really hadn't been established as a business model. And, you know, there were no concepts such as group coaching, educational content provider, online courses. None of those ideas were really around that time. In fact, you know, the internet was a twinkle in someone's eye. And, you know, so at this particular juncture, it just didn't make sense. So I resisted because it didn't make sense. But I've since discovered that when I follow my head so much, it doesn't always take me to where I think it's going to take me. But when I follow my intuition and I follow my heart, I always find myself in my happy place eventually.
Yeah, and it's hard to do that, isn't it? And I know you talked about earlier on about not necessarily following your parents and being able to change. And you know, I'm very, very aware of that. That sometimes, you know, it's not until you have the confidence to make a decision that would be different to what your parents have made, and not just to spite your parents, which, you know, many of us do. I mean, I think back and say, look, I always hated classical music because my dad loved it so much. You know, kind of rammed it down my throat, and it made me go the other way, right? I think that we make some decisions based on just wanting to be different, but I think when you've got the confidence to make the decisions that are your decisions and realize that they're different decisions to your parents, it's a huge realization, and I think that not many people do make that realization. They just follow the same path.
Yeah, well, also it's something that you said there. You know, that you said that you wanted to be confident enough to make the decision, and a lot of our thinking is quite sequential in that way too. You know, what happens is a lot of us think like I wrote a book a few years ago called Raw Courage because I'd read so many books on courage, and I thought to myself, most of these don't actually give me any courage. You know, most of these are very much what books and not how books. You know, they don't tell me how I'm going to get courageous. And so I started doing a lot of research around it and drew on my own experience of courageous moments. And the thing that I realized is, like confidence, courage is the same. We completely get it wrong. What we think is we've got to be confident enough before we do the thing, or we've got to be courageous enough before we do the thing. The truth is we get courageous and we get confident when we back ourselves, even though we are so scared to do that thing. And, you know, as business people, I think most of us will be able to go somewhere through our lives and look back at a moment that we were very, very scared, but we did it anyway. And as a result of that, we made incredible inroads, you know, into, you know, or we ascended up that ladder so much higher, so much faster because we took that leap of faith. And without courage, without confidence, and then we found our courage and we found our confidence on the other side.
It's often reflection is such an important idea. And I was with someone recently and they sort of challenged us. It was a group of us and they said, go back to 2004 and remember what you were doing in 2004. Where were you at? What did you want to achieve in 2004? And it was interesting because everyone was, you know, they chose. I'm not quite sure why they chose 2004 specifically, but they did. And you know, I certainly remember what 2004 was like for me, and being employed at the time, and various things that had happened, and the growth that's happened since then. And I know I was with a client recently where she was focused on things that were happening now and that weren't going as right as she would like, and yet I sort of stopped her and said, just look at the last 18 months. Like I said, do you have any idea how much you've achieved in an 18-month period? And she was almost, teary by the time we kind of reflected on that for a few minutes. And I know that that's such an important aspect of what we do, isn't it? And 2004, I know, it would have been auspicious for you because that's when you started, right, in the business.
Yeah, I started actually in 2002, but 2004 was actually a real pivotal time for me because I started my life coach study in 2002 and I completed it along with my neuro-linguistic programming training in 2004. But I also got an idea for a book, and that book was the pivotal moment for me because it turned into a bestseller. A lot of people read it, and I had people from all over the world, demanding that I teach them how I had that massive quantum leap in my business and in my life. And they wanted to know, how do you think in richer ways? How do you bring about a lot more success in your life because of your thinking? Because most of us, I don't really believe, most of us have actually joined the dots. When something's not working in our business, what we first usually go to is denial. We just put our head in the sand, pretend it'll go away, pretend times will change. The second place we go is commiseration. We sit at the pub, we talk to our mates about how bad things are, and we drink too much and etc. Or we, hug our girlfriends, or, whatever we do. But the third level that wiser people will go to is they'll go to skill. What do I need to learn in order to improve my skill around that area? But the smartest of all go, what is the thinking that is creating the thinking that is taking me down the wrong path? And so few people go down that corridor. So many people will jump to denial, commiseration, skill, and very few people will go, okay, I want to change my thinking. Because I don't believe that a lot of people actually think that you can think differently. And I don't believe a lot of people have actually joined the dots that know that different thinking creates different outcomes. Actually, I'll give you a really good story around this. One of my mentors, I sat down and he asked me, what are my dreams? What are my dreams and aspirations in my business? And I told him that, I had a monetary figure, I wanted to make millions, and that was it was a very broad and non-specific monetary figure. And he said to me, how many millions specifically? And I said, I don't care, just as long as it's lots. And he said, that to me doesn't sound like an ironclad type strategy or outcome. And he said, okay, so let me ask you another question. He said, why? Why do you want to do this? And when I started to answer the why, money wasn't involved at all. I said, the reason I want to do this is because I've had a very hard beginning in life. I had a tough start. And my life was not all that great. I suffered with depression. I suffered with anxiety. I had issues with money, broken relationships, all sorts of things that, led me down horrible places. And I said, I now know how's the thinking that will not allow that sort of level of decline. And I want to make sure that I can teach as many people as I possibly can, to live a life beyond limits. That's really my goal. That's really my aim. And he said, finally, we're at a good point. He said, you have a big enough why. And I almost had tears in my eyes when I was talking about this. And he said, you have the gold right now in your hands, but it's not in your hands, it's in your heart. He said, when you have a why that's bigger than you, when you have a why that makes you cry, you have the thing that most people don't have. You have momentum, you have desire, you have drive. No one's going to tell you to work till midnight. No one's going to tell you to work 7 days a week. You'll just do it because the why is big enough. So that was the key piece. But the second piece was the pivotal piece. And he said, okay, so what are your key drivers? What's going to get you there? And I didn't even know the phrase key drivers back then. And I didn't even know what he was talking about. You could do the biggest bang for your buck, the lowest result, or it's going to be the hardest that you've never ever done before. But when you do it, it's going to be like a tsunami. And I said to him, the thing that I really think would really do it is if I can get in front of tens of thousands of people, perhaps even hundreds of thousands or even millions of people. And he said, okay, so what's the driver that's going to do that? What's the vehicle? And we sat down and we did a bit of strategic conversation, and we both decided that public speaking would be the best thing for me, to be able to really master the art of public speaking and be able to be professional on stage, be inspirational on stage, create compelling reasons for people to listen, engagement, and then also be able to sell on stage. And so we decided that was going to be my key strategy, besides writing books as well. And so I remember the very first time that I committed to do it. And I was scared. Like, I was really, really, really scared. It wasn't stopping me, but I was nervous. I had a dry mouth. I was shaking, and I was feeling the fear of having to get up there on a stage in front of people. And I did it. The outcome was that in that one talk, I earned 3 months' income in that one talk. In one day, I earned 3 months' income. And that for me was a moment where my brain exploded, because I thought, wow, I have faced my fear. I have done it. I've got the strategy. I've got the system. I've got the structure. And I got 3 months' income in one day. So if I want to earn my whole year's income, I just have to do 4 talks. And this was pivotal because, of course, I got busy on planning the next talk, and I got up and I did it again and expecting to get 3 months' income. But I made a whole year's income in my next talk. And all of a sudden, I began to realize that is my key driver. So all of my energy, all of my focus was getting in front of people and being able to inspire them, motivate them, encourage them, give them good quality information so that that event could turn their lives around. And that started building for me a reputation. Many people would invite their friends, their mothers, their uncles, their aunts, other people, and they'd say, you got to come, you're going to learn so much. It's great. And so that's what was the cornerstone of our business, the keystone. And it really held our entire business together. And I realized that prior to that, I had been so distracted. I had been doing so many things. Like you and I were talking earlier about posting on Facebook, and the amount of time that people waste, hoping. Like, I teach a lot of coaches and I go, guys, unless you've got a solid strategy with Facebook, don't expect that you're going to post some positive memes and you're going to have clients screaming out saying, I want you to coach me. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to work.
It doesn't work that way. And it's interesting. I wanted to ask you just before we wrap things up, but I wanted to ask you, how did you make the switch then from you talking directly to people to coaching coaches, and even indeed why even make that switch?
The reason that I made the switch was because I realized I was just one person and I have a big mission. And I really do want to make a difference in this world. I want people to be kinder to one another. I want people at first to be kinder to themselves. And I know a lot of negative self-talk that happens in people's heads. Really, it's like going into a boxing match with yourself. And I realized that as one person, I could only write so many books. I could only do so many talks. I could only do so many coaching sessions and so forth. And so what I built a model to essentially build an army of coaches and, teach as many people everything, absolutely everything I know about coaching. And so the thing that I love so much is I love teaching and I love sharing. But what I love more, like, one of my coaching clients last night, in a big group, I teach all these coaches, and one of them got up and he said, "I've got something to announce," and we said, "Cool. Well, what have you got?" And he's a delightful man, and he's the happy coach. He's all about happiness, and he lives and breathes everything that he is. And he said, "I've got my first client. I've got my first client. The strategy that you shared last week, it works." And he was so excited. And it was so beautiful to see this man who, his finances are not that great.
Yeah.
And to see him now turn this corner, like he's prior to learning how to coach, he was driving Uber. And he used to tell me, "Oh my God, Rik, I've been driving all night. I've only had 3 hours sleep, and I'd say, 'How much money have you made?' And he'd say, $300. And you'd say, 'Do you realize that you could have just worked with perhaps one or two clients and made that in 2 hours?'" And he couldn't get that at first, but it's so delightful to see the joy.
I love all of that, and Rik, we could talk for hours and hours, and there's so much to delve into with your stories. I just wanted to ask you one final question to what I'm always fascinated with, being my marketing background. So you got to the point where you wanted to do these talks, and how do you get to the point of going, okay, I want to do these talks, and you've got large audiences and continue to grow those audiences? Because yes, there's a point where you get momentum, as you said, people telling friends and family, but it's that initial inertia. How did you create that, and what do you continue to do to create that?
Yeah, the first thing that I teach our coaches to do is don't go out with a generic message. It's very hard to attract a very big audience with a very generic message. I'll give you a very quick classic story. There was a coach that came to me and she said, "I'm hearing what you're saying. I'm going to be an anxiety coach." And I said, "Look, the first thing you have to understand about a niche is it has a pull effect and a push effect. So the thing is, if you go out as an anxiety coach, it has a pull effect, in that people who have anxiety could perhaps find you. And that's how you're going to build your audience. But you don't have a push effect with that. You can't go and find people who have anxiety. I mean, where do they live? Where do they congregate? What magazines do they read? What groups do they subscribe to, etc.?" So I sat down with her, we did some work, and we decided to get a push effect to this. And I said to her, "What if you became a performance anxiety coach and you just work with theater actors, movie actors, anyone who wants to act or perform, singers, people like that. And she loved the idea. And I said, okay, now strategy 2, now that you have this extra word attached to your niche, now what you need to do is look for the key people of influence, the people who influence your audience. So, she went to NIDA, she went to the Victorian College of the Arts, she went to film and television school, and I wrote her a script, and she just had to call these people on the phone and go through this script. She called me back a day later and she said, oh my God, I've got 3 talks to do to NIDA, Victorian College of the Arts, and Film and Television School. And so essentially the script was that she had to simply say, what I'd like to offer you is an opportunity for free. But before I offer you this opportunity, I just want to find out, would your students benefit by massively reducing their levels of anxiety prior to performance? And it was rhetorical. Of course, the answer was, yeah, that would be hugely beneficial. Well, do you have meetings? Do you have AGMs? Do you have conferences? Do you have moments where you need good speakers to deliver good content to your students? And they said, well, actually, we do. We've got something coming up fairly soon. And, those 3 gigs got her so busy that she never had to market again. And, it was incredible, the response she got. And she got to a point, she was number 1 on Google whenever you put performance anxiety coach. She's no longer there. She's now retired. But the thing is that, that's a pivotal point, really getting very, very clear. You've got to say, this is my audience. I know where to find them. And now you've got to have a talk that draws that audience out from behind their TV sets, takes them out of their houses, gets them in a place, because what you are offering them is life transforming or shifting or changing.
Fantastic, Rik. As I said, we could talk for a long, long time, and I really appreciate all of the insights that you've given. And we're going to include in our show notes information on how you can get in touch with Rik. And there's so much stuff on your website for people to get samples of what you're about and learn more. Thank you again for being part of BizBytes. And I know personally I look forward to continuing the conversations into the future.
Thank you kindly, Anthony. I really appreciate you having me today.